they're about something. Sometimes he even tells you in the title what they're about. The fact is that he made paintings about, let's say, Jerusalem, because he went to Jerusalem, because he, like most of us, was deeply impressed by those old stones. They are amazing in Jerusalem, by the landscape outside the walls of Jerusalem, which, by the way, isn't so different from certain parts of Australia, by the fact that all of those people had peopled Jerusalem and fought like hell and killed each other, etc., that each doorway someone had entered in those very old houses could have been a rotten crusader out to kill whoever was there, could have been an old Christian looking for God. Very aware of all of those things and the great difficulty of expressing those feelings about those stones and so on in a language which is nonverbal. Yet he allows you to know that this was in Jerusalem. And some of us who've been to Jerusalem could respond. I certainly did, particularly to the shift in his palette, to those ember-like reds, deep colors that at night in Jerusalem is absolutely like that. It's like that. He may not have meant that, but I think he did. He got it. He caught it. So there's that anecdotal thing. Then there is inevitably a personal note, the fact that he's married to an Australian writer whose themes very often have to do with the unthinkable, namely the Holocaust. The Holocaust is a big subject and very few artists dare even to try to deal with it, but they do dare. And David Rankin is one of those artists who was haunted by it through his wife's history, which both her parents were in the worst camps, the concentration camps. That in itself is worth your spending a little thought on. And it's not explicit. It couldn't be explicit. If it were explicit, it would be nothing, absolutely nothing. Cheap Japanese cartoons or something. It's implicit in the painting. And of course, he probably struggled very much to keep it that way. It's not easy. But he does allow you to know that there's something going on here that's very dark and, of course, very human. And alas, it's still going on. And he did say to me, and I have a quote here, he once said to me that while he was working on such a somber and unthinkable subject, he said he discovered, quote, the sort of pitch black Irishness that comes through in Joyce and Beckett. I think that's pretty good, because that's what I felt in those, when I first saw those paintings. I thought that. I really thought, here's a real black Irish guy, and he knows how to express this sort of despair. And then he came across a remarkable book. I regard it as the book about that dreadful idea, the Holocaust, and that's by Primo Levi, who survived the camps and, like quite a number of other artists, poets, eventually committed suicide. Primo Levi wrote a book, it's called The Drowned and the Saved, and David did a painting. I've never seen it. It's here in Australia. It's very large. We couldn't get it for this show, but it's called The Drowned and the Saved, and that's all you need to know. The thing about Primo Levi, and the thing that I think, for me, David Rankin captured, Primo Levi didn't tell you about these horrors in a sensational way. What he talked about was the shame of being a human being, the shame to know what these other human beings could do. That is a very difficult job, and Levy was I think a great writer. He did it. And I believe that is, I feel it in the work of David Rankin, that he recognized, he understood what Primo Levi was telling us, and he, in his language, which is nonverbal, was trying, and did, in my case, tell us about that. And then you see there are certain motifs like Golgotha, which means, Golgotha has a meaning for him, which isn't just Christian. Because it was, before it was a Christian motif, it was of course a Jewish motif, and so on. And it encompasses all the histories, the Turks, the Arabs, the Christians, the Greek Orthodox, everybody who's there in Jerusalem is in David's mind in a kind of Golgotha, so that it broadens it. In all of these works having to do with the unspeakable of my century, the 20th century, it always reminds me that a very great poet, Rainer Maria Rilke, he asked this question, which I never seem able to forget. He said, "Why must a man go about and take unknown things so much upon himself?" I'm sure that's how David feels. Well, you can ask David later, but we have to ask ourselves those questions, and you have to ask yourself, why does a man struggle to make these emblems of deep emotion speak? And when you look at these paintings, that's why I'm speaking in a rather abstract way. I don't want to tell you how to look at these paintings. I want to tell you how I perceive them, and to somehow suggest how difficult it is to be an artist, and you have to try to understand that. Then he goes on, I'm not going to go on and on and on, but I did want to mention that in the 1990s, he starts working with different motifs, such as the husband and wife motif, or as he sometimes says, the yin and yang, a kind of philosophic way of looking at how we wander through life, very often with husbands and wives, or yin and yang, and the Many Rooms series, which in itself is very suggestive. And as I told David, it reminded me very much of what Willem de Kooning, the American painter, said to Mark Rothko, who was being already accused by the stupid critics of painting the same painting all the time. And de Kooning said to him, "Your house has many mansions." And yeah, I think about David's work like that too. There's a painting I'm looking at now, and you can look at it later, which is called Dona Nobis Pacem, which is owned by young collectors here. I don't know where they live, but they're Australian. And he did a number of those paintings. I don't know how many, but more than one. And I myself gave it my own interpretation. It's a general painting about a certain kind of experience, which I'll have to call a mystical experience. There is such a thing. To me, they're like little votive candles that I read about they had in Jerusalem, for instance. They had little lanterns that burned. I think there's even a Jewish holiday about that lantern, but I don't remember what it's called. They just keep burning in the darkness of life and the night. And if you look at the painting, and that's not easy to paint, you'll see the flicker, which I associate with life, the flicker of life. And when he talks about elemental union, as in this large painting here, I think it's the most recent of all the works in this show, you can also see this flicker of a lambent flame of some kind. There's a flicker, and at every cross-section is a spark, like a life spark. And it's an attempt by serious artists to talk about what we would call a point of view of existence, which is what philosophy is. That's how we have to think finally about life. And we try. We don't succeed very often, but you might succeed in having a feeling about it. No definition. I wouldn't even attempt a definition. Although maybe that is a definition. I don't know. Votive lights, electrical charges, life itself, and so on. And I'm going to stop with he's one of the very few painters I know who dares to use the word moral consciousness. Moral consciousness is not so easy to bear, and most of us don't. Most people in the world don't seem to me very moral, and certainly not very conscious. But that is one of his, shall we say, desiderata in his life's work, which is he's a painter. That's what he is. And that's not very easy to translate. So when you look at these works, I think it's really important to bear in mind he's trying the impossible, as good artists usually do. And they know it's impossible, and yet they try. So that, I think, should command great respect. I'm going to open the floor. You may make comments. You can make your own lecture if you like, or ask questions, or address me, or ask my colleague who wrote the beautiful essay in the catalog about the drawings, Frédéric Jeannet, who's a very fine French writer, and David's lucky to have him, to write about him. So we'll all be available, right? As long as you don't ask me what my criteria are. Nobody have any comments? How do you see the paintings? Or why are you here? Yeah.
Occasionally I come across an exhibition where I have the general feeling through the work that they radiate a light. And it was interesting, I had a brief conversation with David last night about his work, where he made a comment to me that in his earlier work, he had ideas of being spiritual or Zen and things like that, but those days are over. And it's an interesting experience for me because the more that the work progresses up to this point here, I just find that the light is so stronger in these later works. It's almost like the intensity has become much more incisive, and probably also the issues that he's dealing with are more deeper. And yeah, all I can do is just say how much I congratulate him for his journey.
I agree with you. Yes, definitely. And journey is the word. Of course, skill enters. His craft has benefited by years and years and years. I think that we must always remember that. I mean, too often people forget that. You know.
And I think it's just reflective of something also that you mentioned earlier about some artists when they have their best moments in their creative time is when they transcend the eye.
Yeah.
And it's quite clear that David's had that.
Yes.
Either in the process or maybe not even in the process, but it reflects in the work.
Or at least the aspiration is there.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just really wonderful to see because it's fairly rare.
Yes.
That I come across it.
Yes, true.
I have come across it in other painters like Rothko in particular. He was one of the first person's art that I experienced this with, and some Aboriginal artists as well. And it's a delight to see that here.
I think you're right. I agree with you. Anyone else? Yes.
I'd like to ask you about Pierre Talcott, how you came across him historically. I've seen some of his work.
Say it again.
Pierre Talcott. You mentioned
Pierre Talcott, yes.
Yeah.
How did I find him?
Yes.
Oh, well, I was a girl in Paris. I was studying painting, and I went into